This is Beyond the Veil with Norman Meredith.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Norman coming from Pickens, South Carolina tonight with a great show. We're going to talk Bigfoot encounters. I have two guests tonight, Rick Rails with the BFO. He's an investigator with them. And witness Nolan A., who's going to talk about some Bigfoot encounters that he had at a job site he was working. He's got some wonderful pictures to share with us. And my beautiful hostess with the mostest, Jackie from Beyond the Moon. How y'all doing tonight?
Great. How are you?
Good.
Great. I'm glad y'all are here tonight. Well, before we get started, I've been putting off doing a drawing, so it's been about a month, and so I got to choose 5 numbers to give away some prizes tonight. And so my producer, so I don't be biased and nobody can say I got swayed by any wet t-shirts that might have been sent to me or anything like that. You know, my producer's doing the numbers, and I'm going to read off the potential names of the winners. Let's see who I got here. Let's see who's close to that number there. Okay, hold a second here. Oh, Holly Seacrest. You will get stickers. Okay, let me put in here stickers.
Those are pretty sweet.
Very nice.
Okay, next up is a t-shirt. Let's see. 873.
That's
Dennis Carroll. He was on our show. He's going to get a t-shirt.
That's pretty cool.
Okay, next is going to be a ball cap.
Norman, I really like that logo. That's really cool.
Thanks, I appreciate it. That's going to be Mikhail Costano. Kastano. You've won a ball cap. Let me put that in here. Yeah, if you guys want any, let me know. I sell them now. Some
Nice.
folks get them for free. Just depends how much I might like you.
I'll swap her.
William Nighthawk. Nope, I'm sorry. Dorothy Smith. You have won the coffee cups.
Hey,
You get 2 coffee cups.
That's sweet.
Wow, very nice.
And last but not least, Paul Reed, you won the grand prize. Everything.
Wow.
I will be contacting you all within a day or 2 to get your addresses so I can ship out this merchandise to y'all. Congratulations, winners.
that's awesome.
Very nice.
All right. Now we're going to get to a project I've been working on, and I'm going to share with you 2 pieces of this project for a future comic/book. All right, y'all. See, this is from some of my misadventures in my private investigations before I started working with the group. Now, what you see here is I was actually out with a group when this happened. We were seeing a bunch of orbs off in the distance, hearing different noises. A particular one is usually a whoop, and I had an artist do it up in a funny way where Bigfoot is playing with a laser pen, showing little points of light off in the distance, and then giving a holler. And I thought I'd make fun of the situation, so it's not always to be so serious about everything, but to show a little bit of humor. So I hope y'all get a kick out of that.
It's good.
And then I've got one more. This
Yeah, I thought that
happened
was funny.
in the spring of 2023. I was recovering some trail cams, and I slipped and rolled down a hill, and I swear to God, there was a Bigfoot nearby, and he was laughing his butt off because I could hear this chuffing sound, and it wasn't a deer. If you ever heard a great ape chuff, that's what it sounded like. And this thing was doing a great job of laughing at me because I busted my ass coming down that hill. And so I wanted to share this with y'all tonight as a precursor of some future, possibly going to be a small book I'm going to put out with a small explanation of what each of these comics is. And then there may be a second one coming out on the more serious side of a small panel of people's encounters first time. And it might be done in the DC style of comic, just to do something a little different. All
Want
right.
to give a shout out for the artist before we
Yes.
move further?
Yes. Brittany did this. Last name is, hold on a second here. Before I say the wrong name, I got too many people. Brittany Witten did this for me of Anderson. And because it works so well, I'm going to probably put her on commission and make her the lead artist on my projects. All right.
Yeah.
You got a couple of guests. Let's get into it.
Yes, let's talk Bigfoot tonight. Now, Rick, you're a BFRO investigator and also an author on stick structures.
That's correct.
Now, I know people don't like to use the word experts when it comes to Bigfoot. I'm going to say, if you've been doing it long enough and you've gathered as much data as you have, I'm going to say that makes you an expert. You know.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
This is my opinion. And people don't like it. You know, it's just like that other thing they always say about opinions.
I
I'm going to be
appreciate
honest.
that.
I mean, there's a lot of things can't be proved, but people still say they're experts. So to me, I think you're an expert in this field.
Well, I've been at it a long time. I mean, and I've had multiple encounters, 3 Class A's where I could say I actually saw this thing. First was back in 2010. So this is 2024. I've been out in the woods researching this for 13, 14 years.
Well, I'm glad you're out here to share, help share your knowledge, help people that may need it, try to debunk those that are trying to fake it, because I've seen some videos here lately of fakers. I've seen AI enhanced photos that would be, that's not doing the community very good.
No.
And after meeting you and the rest of the team and spending a couple days with y'all, I'm very impressed, and I've become a big supporter for the organization because I believe in your mission after meeting y'all, working with y'all for a weekend. And this show is always going to be a supporter for y'all. That's my belief here. But let's go on. Now we've got Nolan with us. Now, Nolan, we're not going to say what you do for work because people might try to track you down and harass you, and we're not going to do that. So we're just going to leave you as Nolan A. And you're working a job site. We won't say where, just the fact it was in North Carolina. And you come across some interesting things that most people would never think twice about. You want to talk a little bit about it and tell us what set off this chain of events that brought you and Rick together?
Sure. I kind of want to give some context to this whole thing. In the summer of 2023, we went to a wedding and I talked to a guy and he started talking about Bigfoot. And I'm like, come on, man, like that shit's bogus. And, we would have seen this thing. We've got such high, technology, radar, LiDAR, all that kind of stuff should detect these things. There's no way this stuff is real. And he turned me on to Art Bell's Midnight in the Desert. And he said, check out the Sierra Sounds. So while I'm at this job, there's a lot of downtime. I'm listening to Sierra Sounds. I'm like, okay, that is different. I can't explain that. And so it started leading me down to other podcasts and some TV shows because I was in it to vet what was, considered evidence and to try and find some sort of rationale behind it because of my background. It's pretty science heavy. I thought there's got to be way more logical explanations for what it is that people are saying or claiming is Bigfoot. So one day after a weekend of some rain, I came across this thing on September 11th. And part of this construction site is we use these industrial compactors. So basically, they compress the soil to make it dense enough to where you can build a structure on top of it and it won't fail. And this thing that I found had looked somewhat like a bear print, but also looked like a boot print, but it was a weird shape. And it puzzled me, and I took a bunch of pictures of it and other prints around the area. I'm like, we just compacted this to 115 pounds per cubic foot. You would have to be quite heavy in order to make an impression. And so throughout the week, I kept thinking about it and was so, confused because it looks like it has toes and whatnot. And then I had a thought in my own head, and I looked towards the woods, and I was like, if this is actually here, if there are these forest giants or Sasquatch or Bigfoot, give me something that's definitive, right? So the following Monday, I come to the job site, and we had just compacted a different area of soil, and there was a mound of dirt, and at the base of the mound of dirt was this. It was a little bit before 9 a.m. It was super dense fog. We had close to 2 inches of rain. That rain stopped a little after 1 a.m. Monday morning. And so I was there only a few hours later, and it was so hard to drive through. The only thing that would really get through that mud was something like an excavator.
Right. We're putting up a couple of these prints now to show you. And if you want to explain a little bit, we're going to go back to the first print with the ruler next to it.
Right.
And
so I'm walking up to look at where we were putting in a drain line for stormwater. And because of the rain, I was like, I haven't seen any black bear prints yet. I'm so excited. Maybe I'll get to see some. And as I'm approaching this area that we had just compacted with a large industrial compactor, just outside of that had this mound of dirt, and right at the base of that was this thing. And I couldn't believe my eyes. It's like, nobody told me these things exist here, because I'm not from this area. And so, right. I wouldn't think, I've always heard black bear, and then the typical, coyotes and foxes and stuff like that, but nothing larger than that. And after everything I'd heard from my friend and all this stuff I'd been listening to, I just couldn't believe it. It seemed totally unreal. So I ran back to my truck, tried my best to pull the truck around and basically guard it, and got out my tape measure and was like, all right, how big is this thing? Nobody's gonna believe me if I tell them, and I wanted to protect it because I didn't want someone driving an excavator over it and crushing it. So I snapped that picture. I took a bunch of other pictures and started looking around. Now this one is actually more recent. That was taken back in March of this year.
This one,
I ended up driving about an hour round trip to go get plaster Paris to cast this thing, because I thought, how insane is this to come across this massive print that is so clear? And I'm like, it's a once in a lifetime thing. You have to try to cast it. And I had never casted anything before. So I'm like watching YouTube videos. I bought as much plaster Paris, a bucket, some paint stir sticks. And that's what I used basically to outline it, and did my best to get that sort of pancakey texture. Because I'm like, if someone is really trying to pull my leg and pull a stunt here, there's going to be evidence within the cast. Because sure, at a quick glance, you're like, oh, well, that looks like depressions by someone's fingers. Someone just drew that as if they're, drawing in the dirt or on the beach or something. But it's got a lot more texture to it than that. And I thought, okay, so if there's one print, there's got to be more. So I start looking, and I notice there are deer tracks that lead to this print. And around that deer track, there were others. They were very subtle. You could see like a heel to a big toe, but they followed in a straight line along these deer track to that big print, and then return back to the woods. And so I started, looking into it, seeing, okay, what other evidence is there before I told anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
I did confront the crew that was working in the area. And when they saw it, they were terrified. They said, I'm never going back in the woods. They stay close to each other. And they always work in pairs from then on. So they were really, really scared. And then the other people on the property thought that I made it. And I'm like, I wish I was that good of an artist. But it's really crazy once you exhume the cast and you look at the level of detail. And I might be able to send you a picture of that if you want for the podcast. But so like I said, I was listening to these other podcasts and these other testimonies of people just explaining what do they do when they interact with Bigfoot or come across Bigfoot things. And one of them were these things called tree structures. Mm-hmm. And I heard another technique called gifting. So I'm like, okay, maybe something like that could also be around. And within 50 yards of that really nice cast was this X tree structure. So there's the form that I made and the pour.
Right.
But there's an X that's about 6 feet tall. But what's bizarre about it is not that one. That one's on the side of the road. But it was just so perfectly symmetrical, and it's balancing on a dead limb against this tree, and it's just so delicate. And looking at the way the tree is and all the trees around it, I'm like, okay, these branches don't match the tree that it's nearest to. They look like they had been moved from a couple trees over. And the other thing is that they're inverted. So I'm like, okay, that is indicative of falling. But from then on, I just started spending my lunch breaks hiking in the woods, and I started finding even weirder combinations of snap branches, snap trunks, these dead falls, but like that are manipulated, or these trees that are interconnected that are usually like limbless in these weird networks. And I was just so stunned because I've hiked in Colorado, I've hiked in Missouri, Utah, California, Arizona, Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina. I've never seen things like this before. And to me, they stood out as something that was very unique. Sometimes they were subtle, like that arch. Sometimes it's sort of a trained eye thing, but it was just getting weirder. Like the more things I started finding that lined up with all these things I heard, all these podcasts, but in real life, it was super surreal. But I felt, I need to, if the Bigfoot community is actually looking for real evidence, I've got something that's, plausible. I need to reach out to somebody. And that's where I came across Rick's information and got a hold of Rick.
Well, I'm going to ask Rick a few things. Rick, what is your opinion? I know I'm going to say the word expert, and there are no experts. I say in the Bigfoot community and blah, blah, blah. But I say, because I've seen your stuff. I've talked with you. And
thank you.
As long as you've done this, you got to be an expert. I mean, even if you supposedly you can't prove it, in a court of law, he exists.
Right.
Under a court of law, he exists. I'm sorry if the scientific community does not agree with it, but under a court of law, he exists. So you're an expert. All right. I got that done. Tell me your thoughts, especially from the footprints, the stick structures, and from talking with Nolan, what you and your fellow investigator came up with on this.
Yeah, sure. So I am an investigator with the BFRO, and so when people go to bfro.net and file a report of a witness encounter or what they possibly think could be Bigfoot related on a property or an experience that they've had, I get those reports for geography that I manage, which is Western North Carolina, northernmost part of South Carolina currently. It's into Tennessee a little bit. And then I will follow up on those and talk to the witness. And first thing we try to do, and you mentioned it earlier, is make sure it's not a hoax. We try to take the witness through the report that they publish or sent to us. Sometimes things fall apart then, particularly if it's fabrication, overactive imagination, that sort of thing, or if it's a hoax, they step on themselves and they lie. But I didn't run into any of that with Nolan. I mean, Nolan got a hold of me, and right away you could tell he was astonished and trying to figure out what he was going through and what he had here. So disbelief. That's usually when you get a good witness, usually, they're still scratching their head. And
Right.
he was doing that. Then he was nice enough to invite me to the site.
That's
and
even
what I
better.
typically, yeah, and not without giving away the locations, about an hour and 20 minutes or so from where I am, remote, and it's in a big parcel of woods that's being developed. And I wanted to see where this print came from, especially the print that you showed earlier. It's about 17 inches long, with the long finger-like appendages for toes. I mean, knowing something about these prints, having investigated this for a long time, there's things you look for. Dermal ridges, the depression, the break, where it is, mid-tarsal break. So I was looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, it looks pretty authentic. I want to see where it was. And by the time, I got up to his place and on this construction site, and he was then able to take me around and show me some of these stick structures too. And he showed me where this was. And one of the important things too, while we're on the picture of the print, he showed me where it was, and it's on a downgrade.
Right.
So you can see in those toes, which almost look like finger appendages. And for your viewers looking at that, that does happen with Bigfoot, that you can get a splayed toe, toes that are off to the side, very long. Sometimes there's a couple together. And if you look at that one too, you'll see a couple of them are kind of together.
Right.
So one of the things I always look for in a footprint is imperfection, because a hoaxer won't typically put
a hoaxer will make it look look perfect. And in nature, there's always imperfections.
Right. And I'm glad you've got this in front of us here too. This is on a little bit of a downgrade. And, again, his point about the compression of the soil to comply with on this site, they were trying to hit it was dense soil. They were trying to hit a certain target. This thing was sliding in some wet. It had rained a little, as you said, overnight, but it was sliding a little bit downhill as it went in. You can see those marks where it's moved a little bit in the toes, which could have elongated the toes a little bit in the print. So that, to me, made it authentic. But then I see the imperfections too as you look at this. If this is a right footprint, you can see the toe off to the side, which would be the bigger one. And then the smaller ones to the right are a couple of them are jumbled together or stuck together. So there's enough good imperfection in this for me to say I don't believe it was hoaxed. If Nolan hoaxed this thing, he did a heck of a job. So, and then he was nice enough to take me around the site. We spent a few hours. And I saw a number of the stick structures. Yes, I have written what's in my fourth printing, a book on this. It's a field guide to these things. So I've categorized them. I've looked at them. I've got thousands of pictures of these, and there's certain things you look for there too. They're not typically random. When you find stick structures, you'll find certain types. He had them here: the asterisk, the X, the arches bent over and stuck in the ground. Same things. And there's the asterisk right now for your viewers. There's three of these, what I call it's a high angle, acute angle break, an upside down check mark, if you will. And there's three of them next to each other here. They're always in clusters. When these things will build these, and when Bigfoots build these things or put them up in the woods, it's for a purpose, most likely to communicate with each other, not necessarily with us. But a lot of times they're on high ground. I found that here, they were on high ground. Yeah, and you can see these things, the symmetry between the three of these, bang, 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 one next to each other. I actually think Nolan, the kids did these because they're lower.
Yeah.
Because that's what'll happen. They'll mimic what the adults do. But they also fell into the categories I know that I've categorized these things into before. And the asterisk is there, the the X, the arch. He's got one of these that's got an upside down stump that's been elevated up into the air.
We
And
don't
that's
have
another
that
thing.
picture,
Tearing a stump,
unfortunately.
tearing a stump out of the ground and stuffing it way high up in the air is not something that nature typically does.
No.
Yeah.
What do you think,
You
Jackie?
have that picture. It's the long one.
Right. It is a longer one.
Yeah, it's like it goes in a diagonal. You've got a picture of that, and it's the roots are sticking up out of the end. Yeah, that one. So that's about like 6 feet in the air. It's a Y shaped tree that's still alive, and then there are 2 dead trees that are interconnected there. Now, according to physics, if something's going to fall down wherever that is, that soil must be loose enough to where you would see a pit, you'd see some sort of hole, but all the surface of soil around there, even on the other side, was totally solid. There was something about 125 feet away from us that did have an opening, as if something had fallen and been uprooted, but nothing was fallen in next to that opening. And then the other piece of tree in there that's a deadfall also was uprooted and brought from somewhere else. And it would take probably 4, adult men to move one of these trees. They're about, I want to say like 8 to 10 inches in diameter. And I don't know, Rick, you think like 25 feet in length? I mean, this thing, they're pretty big.
Yeah, and I think your point is well taken that they look artificially placed. So it didn't look like they had just fallen. This wasn't wind shear or snow load or something that just fell like a white pine will fall easily in the woods. See, a lot of these are hardwoods, and they're stuffed up into there artificially, almost like it was engineered. So I'm looking at these things as I'm touring the property with Nolan after having seen the cast and where it was. And I'm looking at these and I'm saying to myself, this looks like evidence that you've got resident Sasquatch in this area. Now, he'll go on and we'll talk further, but you've had some gifting in some part of this site too, that you've had interactivity. Why don't you tell them about that?
Right. So once I found that symmetrical X that was leaning against a tree, I don't know what it was about that spot. I think because it was easy to access, it was something I could check pretty frequently. I just decided to take the stuff out of my lunch and put it there. So I put some carrots, some snap peas, an apple. But now part of my setup here is, okay, if I put it's a piece of quartz and then a quarter, and I'm thinking, all right, if a bear comes by, that thing's going to be moved. It's going to be, splayed. I won't be able to find the quarter and the piece of quartz, and all this stuff will, be gone or whatever. But what's odd is that when I came back, so I would place these on a Friday and check it Monday. That way, when the site's empty, the animals would come out and roam and reclaim the area. So I thought that's probably my best bet for getting some sort of response or reaction. Now, I forgot to send it to you guys, and I can send it to you, but the reaction to that was all of that was gone, and the quarter and the piece of quartz were just on the edge of where that apple was placed. So something carefully grabbed this thing and moved it to where those are just subtly displaced instead of, moved way far away. I could see a raccoon possibly taking it. I could see something else taking it, but it was just so bizarre how they're still like sandwiched or like touching where they're laid. Now, I also, when I came back and saw that, there was a bird's nest that was on the other side of this tree. And I had heard about, this gifting exchange is if you leave a gift, sometimes you get a gift in return and maybe it'll be a rock or something. And it was weird because the bird's nest was pretty large. I mean, this thing was probably the size of a dinner plate. And the tree that I thought it could have fallen from would have hit so many different branches to where if it was perfectly upright, it would have rotated and flipped and then possibly been dismembered or elongated or distorted in some way. But what was weird was that it was placed so carefully on the ground. It was in really good condition and well preserved.
Wow.
And so I'm like, okay, maybe that's a response. I'll just note it for now as a piece of evidence. But yeah, I started putting more apples in other areas of that X higher up. I even did a pear in a tree, and like all of the pear, because I put a little toothpick and a hoop of string, so that way it'd be biodegradable, but the whole thing would be gone. And I placed this thing about 10 feet and, several feet off the edge of a limb. And sure, that could be a raccoon or possum. But what was weird was one of the times, so to challenge that, I kept thinking, okay, any animal would come by and eat some free fruit that's on the ground. That makes total sense. So then I thought, okay, I had heard a podcast, and Rick was on that podcast because I found his name, reached out to him. I'm like, all right, maybe I'll give this a shot. I took 8 rocks because he was always talking about this 4. If you put 4 items and what happens, I'm like, maybe I could try this experiment and see what outcome I get. Will it match that? Will it do something interesting? So I grabbed 8 rocks, but what's unique is 4 of them are angular, 4 of them are rounded. And, I just took them, placed them right where I put those apples. And that was on a Wednesday. And a week to that day, Rick came out, and I completely forgot that I even set this thing up. And he's asking me to tell him, what have I found? I had mentioned tree structures to him. And so I'm like, yeah. And I had set up a gifting spot. And so here's that spot. And he's like, did you put those there? And I was like, well, yeah, I did. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they've changed. And what's crazy is that, so it's kind of in a different arrangement, but you can see that a few of the rocks have moved, and they aligned all of the rounded rocks together and had even moved, the kind of angular one to point further
I'm
down.
going to hold you up for a second because I know
Sure.
Jackie's going to ask some questions on this because this is sort of along her forte on stuff similar to this. And I know Jackie's got some questions she's just bursting to ask here.
Well, I'm interested in speaking with the gentleman who has made it a pretty long search for his life. Do these structures, are they all across the globe like this? Or are these structures that you're finding only in these particular areas that you're speaking about now?
I'm glad to answer that, Jackie. So I have seen these things, and I've had reports back from people all across the U.S., Canada. I don't know around the globe, but I can tell you that there are. Actually, I'll show you because it's here. But I've got a field guide to Bigfoot stick structures that I published.
I've been looking through it.
Yeah, and you can put it in your backpack if you go out in the woods. But in this stick structure types, I've got it broken down, and I have, I think, 7 different types in here. So if people like went out and looked, that's what the commonality is. So these things have a tendency of showing up. I don't care if you're in Mayaca Park in Florida or up in British Columbia or anywhere in between. They seem to fall into the same patterns geometrically. And it was random deadfall, microburst, wind, etc. You wouldn't have that. It's just going to scatter everywhere. And you see that. You see a lot of that in the woods. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an intentional area where you've got stick structures that follow these same 7 type patterns that are laid out, almost engineered, built. To Nolan's point, a huge root ball has been stuffed up in the air into a structure that's quite a distance away from anything. There's no root ball hole in the ground near it. It looks like it's brought and placed. So these things typically will look like they've been structured, put together by something. So that comes down to is it people or is it something else? Because really, there's no forest creatures out there that are going to take trees and trees apart, strip off the side limbs, the bark, and build these things like Lincoln logs. And so it just doesn't happen. So, Bigfoots do it. I don't know why they do it, but to answer your question, I know it's a long answer. They do fall into a lot of the same categories, and you will see them in different geography similar.
I'm interested too. A lot of times people will talk about these particular situations, and they will bring out EMF readers and other pieces of equipment to be able to see if there is an electromagnetic frequency that is kind of particularly odd to where these sightings have been. Do you do any research on that line, or have you spoke to anyone that you trust in this particular field that has brought up these details of it being different?
So another great question. Thank you. The answer is yes, I have done it myself, and I have other folks that have done it, witnesses. I've got a couple of habituation sites that I deal with regularly, one
Mhm.
of which has been taking regular EMF readings around where it has gifting and activity. And we do get readings that vary. I won't say just elevated, but we've picked up EMF readings around some of these things as much as 20 times normal. Can't explain that, but wild swings up and down that should not happen in just a natural environment. So, I don't know why that is, but we have used EMF, used RF. I've had
Right.
RF go off around these. And for whatever reason, a lot of times around a cluster of stick structures, you will get odd readings.
Mhm.
And in habituation sites where the Bigfoots regularly visit a gifting station on a property, you get crazy readings too. And, and all over the place, but you don't get just the constant environmental reading.
Right.
With EMF, I think that's around 5. We'll get huge readings. So it's not unlike ghost detecting in that standpoint. Bringing equipment in is something that you should do when you're Bigfoot researching. You
In
should always
in in
always
these
have a recorder going
in
too.
these situations, though, all living creatures give off a magnetic resonance, and very
Mhm.
often when they have touched something or been really super involved in an area, they will have their own specific signature, and that is what you're picking up.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating, and I'm all for any kind of tech used to try to measure what is going on with these. I'm not a big fan of using tech to try to trick these. Norm was on
Right.
an expedition that I led recently, and he heard me say you can't out tech these things, and I don't believe you should try to trick them. When you're out in the woods at night, you're better off relying on your 5 senses. I like to use different devices to interact with them. And I wanted to get to this point relative to Nolan, but when we got on, I visited the site where Nolan was having this activity, and he'll show you some more images of some rocks that are removed and placed. But I brought another investigator with me from South Carolina, and we went up and spent a night with Nolan at this property, and we walked the property while it was still bright out, right up to dusk. Walked around, and we did some knocks and some things to make sure they knew we were there, and we had activity. Nolan and I talked about where would the activity come from. There's a lower area that follows the water here in the woods and the forest, and just as we speculated at night, that's where the activity came from. And we had knocks and eye shine, metal sounds that were mimicking and making whistling. You could hear them walking. We had a good degree of interactivity for a while that night. So, he's had evidence, he's had interactivity when gifting, stick structures, footprints, and we had nighttime activity. So, that things continue to pile up at this property. I'd like to get back out there again. But I think this is a construction site, rural construction site, forested
Yeah.
construction site. And all of a sudden, humanity is in there moving things around and building on it, clearing land, etc. And the Bigfoots are probably on this property, minding their own business.
Yes.
And along we come and start moving stuff around, and so they're walking the site and leaving footprints, and we didn't find anything. I'm surprised you haven't asked, but we didn't find anything malicious or where they were, fouling equipment or aggressive or anything. But
They don't
I
do that.
Yeah, they're on this property though, and humanity has now shown up and disturbed it, and we're now picking up some evidence through there.
A big part of what I would like to have put out there is, yes, they're a fascinating creature, but I think that the best thing that can be done is to kind of like stay on the outskirts of where they are, and for the most part, leave them alone.
Right. The mutual respect for
Yes.
who they are, what they are. They have their space for a reason. They don't interact with us for a reason. I just wanted to add a couple of other things. So that first one that I found on September 11th, there had been other things that had happened in that site, and I thought it was the other construction workers. We had there were rocks that were put in a line, and I had curved them one day to move my truck in place, and then later they had been put back into a line, and I asked the guys who were working there if they had done it. It's still possible that they could have, but they claimed no. But then a few days later, there were these walnuts, and you know how a squirrel or a chipmunk or something shreds a black walnut and all the guts of the flesh of a black walnut. Yeah. Well, on this footer, there are 3 piles, and they're pretty clustered. But then there was one of those rocks was way bigger than the other ones and had a plateau to it, kind of like a little tabletop. And it was just a very nice, neat pile of the flesh of the walnut. And I thought that was bizarre. And that was the same day that I found the print and a couple other weird prints in that area. But, I didn't tell anyone what I was looking at or why I was looking at it, because I didn't want to be told I was crazy. But the piece of evidence that I think was really profound was there are 2 dogs that kind of roam the site, and one of the dogs was with his owner, and we were chit-chatting about the project, and all of a sudden the dog went to the footprints, stopped, looked around, and then followed it to the walnuts, then sniffed the one that was on the big rock, and then went to the pit where I found another, what I thought looked like a bear, like a human type barefoot that had been in mud that had made a mark on this filter fabric stuff. So that was crazy to see, something that has more capabilities of sensory than us found something that I also saw. And then the other thing I wanted to point out, because you brought up electromagnetic stuff, is after talking to someone else that's on the property that has other information that I don't have and access that I don't have, he said that they have performed some ceremonies there, given that it is Native American land originally, and try to do some peace offerings. He also said that someone had detected ley lines on the property that cut across, and part of it goes along this creek, and where we were having our interactions was at the creek. And I didn't find out the ley line thing till I think a few weeks later.
That would make sense, huh, Norman?
Yeah, we talked about that in a previous show about ley lines being part of the things with UFOs and cryptid sightings, because we talked about the possibility of it energizing cryptid creatures and also being a travel path for UFOs, as well as paranormal activity for spirits and such, because of the energy that's being used from it.
Yeah, and so I'll jump in here, but maybe get to the title of your show, but maybe the veil is thin where these ley lines intersect or something, or maybe there's an enhanced amount of energy that allows some crossover, et cetera. Not to get real woo about it, et cetera. We've been talking about physical evidence on this site, but I also follow the Native American beliefs that these things, and to Jackie's point, respect them, leave them alone, etc. But they'll all the Native American tribes, the whole nation across the United States, they've got names for it everywhere, and they all have names for Sasquatch, Bigfoot. It's that's not new. So they all recognize it as a phenomenon of the forest, a forest creature, forest people, persons, if you will. But it's really not in debate. We get stuck in, is this real? Where's the evidence? How do we know? Where's the body? All that kind of stuff. I'm beyond all that because I've been researching it for a number of years. I know they're real. I've seen them, smelled them, had rocks thrown at me by them, cast their footprints. I know these things. I know these things are real. Nolan is scratching his head, as I said. The genuine approach that he had to this thing when I first talked to him was, how can this be? I've been there, Nolan, so I knew what you were going through, and to this day, your curiosity is still an asset in all this, and you've got to maintain a professional, respectful curiosity with these things, and not go after them. Running in the woods with guns, we're going to hunt you down, and all that is not the approach if you want to find evidence.
They must really respect you, though, because they were trying to give you something that maybe you could perhaps eat.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing about the tracks is, so I know, for me, I wanted to collect data, look for any sort of patterns within the data. I was away from this site for about 4 months. And then someday in March, we had a lot of rain. And I went up there, and every time there's rain, I'm like, okay, I'm going to just hike around, see if I see anything that stands out, something that's out of the ordinary. And that's where I found that print where my hand's on the right side. Mm-hmm. And immediately I sent it to Rick. I go, what do you think of this? And he goes, I think that thing has toes. And to me,
it does too.
Yeah, to me, and I took this, the day I found it. I was able to come back about 2 weeks later on the weekend and cast it. It's less defined as it is in this picture, but it still kind of has the two toe outline. And this one is what I believe to be a left foot, and the other one's a right foot. But what also I have found that's pretty interesting is between the balls of the foot and the heel, it tapers in. And that was on the big cast. That was on this print. You could see it. There's another picture I shared where there's a trail, and they're all walking kind of in a straight line. And so once I found that one, I started seeing more, and they lead to this mound. And there is something special and sacred about that mound. There's actually a grave there. But from a biological perspective, it's also where 5 different deer trails intersect, and they match up with this, large footprint trail. So it's crazy because, and it's hard to see in the pictures. I have one where I highlighted all the deer tracks, but the what I suspect to be big footprints are leading to this cluster or this intersection of deer tracks. And the deer even make a circle with their prints. And because of where the grave is, it's sort of marked off. It's kind of a good ambush point. So you couldn't see anything behind that grave area until you were at where the deer would be. And I've seen turkey up at that area too. But I was just like, this is even weirder. The fact that there happens to be a grave, the fact that there's this what looks like a bare human footprint that has toes. It's larger than normal. Like, this thing is 13 inches long. There are several of them. They walk in a straight line. It's not like they're offset like humans. And then they lead to deer. And all these are things I've heard on these podcasts and shows, and I'm like, it's way too weird, all the parallels.
Gotcha.
Well, yeah, I want to just throw 2 things there, because he said 2 things I think are important. And again, you always look to debunk, and somebody who's hoaxing wouldn't come up with this. One is on the print, how it's got a bend in there between the toe box and the balls of the feet and the heel, where you get a little bend in there. So you can see that on the picture that's up. So, big footprint will have that. Human footprints have a little of that. A bear will step in its back feet when they come forward, step in its front
Right.
paw print. But it will not leave that bend. You wouldn't have that bulge at the end. And when it steps in its front print, it leaves another claw mark across the toe box.
Right.
Okay.
That's not it. That's not in any of this. You don't see that. Again, so we're always trying to debunk, those of us that are approach this from a standpoint of show it, prove it to me first, you get the best evidence. The second thing he said is the tracks that he found were in a straight line. A bear does not walk necessarily like that, and they will stagger as they go. And when you find prints in a straight line, like a runway model, that is how a Bigfoot walks.
Mhm.
Third thing would be distance between the prints. And that a lot of times I've measured them up 4 and 5 feet in between the heel of the one in the front and the toe of the one behind it in the straight line. And there's nothing in the woods, and humans do not make that kind of a distance track
Right.
as they walk. So
Yeah,
he's got a lot of evidence here that is credible, and it's piling up.
So in other words, you had a good treasure trove of information to collect from.
Yeah, and even after Rick came out in November, I was still finding tree structures. I was still finding these prints. There was also a print that had a rock in it. The rock is what caught my eye, and then I looked down. There's a bunch of materials and stuff there. It was a stash spot, and I was like, I don't know. Do you think this is something? And he goes, Oh yeah, I see a print. And by that point, it had rained, and so when I wanted to try and go cast it, it was already gone. But I'm glad I at least got the picture of it, because I'm like, I kind of see a heel to possibly a big toe if it's a left foot. It just didn't have enough definition to me.
Right.
But the fact that there was something placed in the center of that print that draws your eye, because that that light color stood out in all this this area of brown and green, and
Right.
so that's what got my attention. It was very subtle, but it was there.
All right. Well, I hate to do this, guys, but I'm about out of time here. But I'll tell you what. Why don't we come back and I'll bring you on individual. We'll talk some more on this subject. And Rick, I'd love to bring you on just to talk about the subject alone, just about Bigfoot and stick structures. And Nolan, we could probably talk a couple hours about your encounter up here. And we may have to do this again here in the future. So if you guys are up to that, I will invite you both back. And before I do that, I'll make sure you guys got some T-shirts so you look the part.
That'd be cool. Thank you,
That's
Nolan.
great.
But
Thank you,
Jackie,
Nolan.
you got
I
anything
appreciate
you
that.
want to say to these guys?
Yeah,
before?
let him. My headset is being pulled off.
You got to tell the pirate. You got to tell that poltergeist to stop playing.
I got touched earlier before we started the show.
I was
And-
behaving.
Really?
There are a couple other. I have a lot of woo woo going on for real. Anyway, what I want you to do, and you will not be able to see this through here because lights and all that, but give a shout out for where they can send pictures of stick structures and things of that sort for your book, and how they can obtain a copy of it.
Yeah, sure. A couple things. So I have an LLC and a partner in Wisconsin, and we do some merchandise also. I Know Squatch is the name of that business. It's on Facebook, Instagram. We have an Etsy store. If you go to the Etsy store, you can get the book, A Field Guide to Bigfoot Stick Structures. And we also have shirts, hats, stickers, all that kind of thing. We do original artwork too. I have a business partner in this that depicts Bigfoot the way that witnesses will see it. So peeking around a tree or striding. So the stuff that you see there, it's all original artwork. So please take a look. I Know Squatch is the name of that. I also will be at a number of different festivals. Last 2 years, I Know Squatch, I've spoken at the festival in Westminster, South Carolina. And in 2 weeks, I'll be in Marion. So Western North Carolina Bigfoot Festival. That's massive. They take over the whole town of Marion. I'm one of the speakers on that Saturday also, I think at 1:00.
Rick,
So
send
I'll
me
be
your
there.
information for I Know Squatch so I can put it up on the site. I'll be more than glad
I
to help
will.
support your efforts on this
Oh,
because I
appreciate
think
it.
that's a good thing to do. I think there's a
will.
lot of Bigfoot believers in this community that would love to find some new merch and support your efforts in this, especially your book. Because, like I said, when I met you, I
Absolutely.
made sure I got 2, and
Great
Jackie
book.
got one of them. Her and her
Okay.
husband
Good, thank
both
you
seem
very
to
much.
enjoy it.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right. So we got to wrap this thing up before Ed wraps somebody's head around a pole.
Oh no, he's just counting those dollars. And Nolan, I
All
want
right.
to
Well, then let's go another half hour more. See what he's.
Nolan, I want to tell you thank you for coming on tonight and
Oh, it's my
sharing your
pleasure,
stories.
Nolan.
Like I say, I wish we had some more time, but we'll look at doing this again in the future. I'll bring you back on. We'll talk some more. And Rick, like I say, once again, thank you for talking. There's a lot that Jackie and I could probably talk to you about Bigfoot itself, the stick structures, how electromagnetic frequency might play into this and ley lines.
Yep.
I mean, I have my own thoughts now, especially after talking to some folks that I somehow, in a way, I believe he may be a living avatar of the Native American pantheon. Because in most Native American language, he's basically called the Big Brother, and the Big Brother is a mentor, protector. He's a family member.
Yes.
And
Yeah. Saytonga.
yes, I would believe that the spirit guides, North American gods, goddesses, put him here to help the Native American people at that time, and he's still here doing it. And we just lost. We never had to touch with him because we weren't native to this land.
Right. But there's definitely a connection there, and there's something to do with a Native American land. Where you have Native American land, you have activity. The expedition we did recently, we were on a lot of Cherokee land. You were on that, Norm. There's activity, more activity there, and I have witnesses that I still talk with. That one of the things, I will ask a question when they tell me about their encounter, and I'll say, "Do you have Native American blood in you?" And you'd be surprised how many times they pipe up and say, "Well, yes, I'm part Sioux or Lakota Sioux or Cherokee or whatever." It's just amazing. But so that connection's still there.
And I think that's a big part of it too, is ancestral connections by blood. I think plays part of it. And even those of us with European blood or some of the Slavic blood have a connection too, but in a different way. It just depends where you may come from in Europe or the Slavic areas. There are some connections there that may be similar to the Native Americans, but not quite. That's just a thought. It's a hypothesis.
Interesting. Very interesting. Good. Well, thank you for that.
Well, there's a few things I still want to talk with you about. It's like, say, one day we meet. It's going to take an hour or 2, 3 to sit down over some coffee and stuff and talk.
Sure. Glad to.
And that'll be something for the next show. Anything you want to add to this, Jackie?
I think you guys did a really great job, and so there's really not
thank
too
you.
much to add.
I'm impressed with them. I mean, they basically ran the show tonight. We were just along for the ride.
Yep.
Okay, guys.
Well,
once again, thank you. And I'm going to give my ending credits. Everybody, want to give a shout out to Logos, who does my signs, banners, t-shirts, coffee cups, and everything else. William Nighthawk's show, Down the Rabbit Hole. And what's that other one? I can't make it out. I ain't got my glasses on, but look up William Nighthawk and his shows. He's a great supporter of my show here.
He's
also,
great.
the Bigfoot Field Research Organization. I'm a very big supporter of them after meeting with them, working with them, and interacting with the people of them. You've got a Bigfoot problem. You need to report a sighting. You need to talk about issues. Contact the Bigfoot Research Organization. They're on Facebook. You can ask them questions. You can ask for an investigator. They will help you out if you need it. Be there to ask you. These are the people I will refer you to. If I'm nearby, if I can help you, I'll do my best. If you got paranormal issues, I'll find you the people. If you got ET, definitely I'm coming down to talk to you. If you got anything else, I might be able to come down and help, see what we can do. And if I can't, like I always say, I will find the resources, the people to help you out, to talk to you, do what needs to be done within the limits of my abilities. If I can make a difference to one person, to one family, then this show has done what it needs to do. You know, we're here for a little fun, a little education, some laughs, and just have a pleasant hour together. So, getting ready to sign off tonight from Pickens, South Carolina, the other side of the moon with Jackie, and my guests, Rick and Nolan. Thank you all for coming to share with us tonight on Beyond the Veil. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.